Hey, welcome everybody. Martinis with Scott. What are our Chief Restructuring Officers, CROs, and what are they good for? That's what we're going to discuss today. Calm down on the music here. Episode 21 of Martinis with Scott, if you can believe it. 21 episodes plus a few quick shots. I shot 2 of them just now, in fact. So you'll look for a quick shot probably out next Tuesday, and then the week after that, I discussed tangible net worth definition and pre-money, post-money valuations. The Martinis with Scott is an in-depth conversation about winning a business. Is targeted towards entrepreneurs, business owners, managers, intended to help you win, discussing various topics. Coming at you today live from beautiful Fernie, British Columbia, at the Lizard Creek Lodge. I took the angle today of renting a room and hope that I get quiet and stable internet, which has been a terrible problem out here. Hopefully in about a month I'll have my own studio, but so far it's makeshift, and I hope that the quality here is good and continues to be so. Martinis with Scott, it's been a great week. Have a toast. As for me, since I don't have a bartender, today I'm just drinking Fernie Distillery's vodka. This is the best stuff on earth. I love that vodka. If you ever get a chance, they don't actually ship it. So you have to be here, or maybe you can reach out to me and I'll bring some home in my suitcase for you. Remember to subscribe on YouTube, the Martinis with Scott channel. Go hit the subscribe button, or on the podcast, or on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Again, search for Martinis with Scott and hit subscribe. So today we're talking about what is a CRO, a Chief Restructuring Officer, and then we're going to get into sort of the why would you have one? What are these people? Who are they, and how do you hire them? That type of discussion. I don't think we'll be too long today. Let's see how it goes. So CRO is someone that, generally speaking, is someone that can come into your business, help affect a turnaround of that business and or restructuring. And here's where we get into our first complication. When we talk about restructuring, most people think of, certainly the professionals that I associate with, think about a balance sheet restructuring, a formal insolvency process, something along those lines. And that's not necessarily what this means. This just could be a turnaround, an operational turnaround, with a balance sheet that's left alone isn't fine. But a CRO, someone that comes in, affects the turnaround and or restructuring, is there in your company for a limited period of time and then leaves. I don't want to get too on that. It is a misused term, both in the US and in Canada. If you're talking to an insolvency professional, a CRO is somebody who has been appointed by the company, but that often is blessed by the courts in an insolvency process. And that has protection via court order of, for liabilities and whatever. But, often non-lawyers, when they talk about CROs, are not talking about that. They're talking about a turnaround professional, somebody who can just drop into the company, become an officer, not become an officer, whatever the case may be, on a deal-by-deal basis, and affect the turnaround. So I'm going to use the word CRO because I'm sitting in Canada as we speak, and it's a very common term here. We don't use turnaround professionals very often in terms of the language, of turnaround. But when I say CRO, it could be a legitimate Chief Restructuring Officer. It could be a turnaround professional. It could be an interim executive with the same sort of task. It could be a made-up term. I'm right now, as we speak, the Chief Transformation Officer of a company, and I have a second engagement letter out to be a Chief Transformation Officer, transforming the company from here to there, as opposed to an insolvency, as opposed to a restructuring. So let's not get hung up on terms. So in general, what does a CRO do? This is a neutral outside party. If you have to negotiate with stakeholders like a bank, or shareholders or unsecured creditors, good to have a neutral outside party that can take on those discussions, and someone that is generally qualified and understanding of insolvency and restructuring processes. someone who can identify a turnaround plan that is both optimistic but also realistic, and whether that just be a pure turnaround and continue on with the business, or a sale of the business through a 363 or some other process in the US, a liquidation of the business, or somewhere in between those options. So, you can have a turnaround, you can have a refi, you can have a sale, you can have a liquidation, and a bunch of nuances in between. So your turnaround advisor, your CRO, should help you make that decision. And then they should act as the intermediary between the company and the stakeholders, both internal and external, right? You have to convince your employees, you have to convince your bank, you have to convince your unsecured creditors of whatever the plan is, and your CRO ought to be doing that. And then they ought to be running the process and make it as smooth as possible, okay? So I'm gonna walk you through some points of interest in our typical engagement letter for a CRO. And this will give you some insight as to what a CRO is and what they do for a company. So the first one, the bullet point, would be to develop a plan for the restructuring of the business and assets. And again, as I just discussed, restructuring doesn't necessarily mean a balance sheet restructuring. When we refer to an operational turnaround, we're also referring to, from a legal definition perspective within this engagement letter, that's also restructuring. So whatever the plan is, the CRO helps to come up and develop that plan. Managing and directing all presentations and negotiations with creditors, suppliers, stakeholders, potential purchasers, investors, and any other interested parties that are necessary or desirable for the restructuring. In other words, to implement that plan. Manage and direct and implement the plan itself, including all necessary and desirable arrangements with lenders, creditors, stakeholders. So not only are you negotiating, but you're causing the company to enter into whatever contracts, discussions, agreements, handshakes, whatever, to implement that plan. Leading all communications in general. So often, certainly in larger companies, you would have a press element to this. So you want to have a CRO that is persuasive, understands how to craft a message. Unlike some of, we did 2 examples on Martinis with Scott in August and maybe I think they were both in August, how not to do that with CanTrust. So you can go back and look up that show, and how to do it with Afria, and you can go back up and look up that show as 2 glaring examples of what not to do and what you could do, and how a CRO ought to be used in those instances. Or they did not have CROs, they had interim CEO, kind of the same man. What else do we have here? Manage all processes, establish the work plan, report to the board, or the special committee set up to deal with whatever issue you're dealing with, coordinate with the CEO and other management. So here we get into roles and responsibilities, which is always a big deal. You say, okay, well, I brought a CRO into my business. Is this person now running the business for me, or what is the authority of the CEO anymore? And the answer is, it's whatever you negotiate and put into your contract. If you're a CRO, you should not do the job if you don't have the authority to turn around the business, to make decisions and implement what you need to implement to be effective. I've made that mistake in the past where I allowed myself to get into a situation where we didn't have the authority, and it's not good, right? If the existing management team was already turning around the business, they wouldn't need a CRO. You need a CRO that has some authority. On the other hand, you don't want to take the CEO and the VPs and the management team away from the day-to-day operations of going to make money. You want to relieve them of the stresses of the turnaround plan, and you want to execute on the turnaround plan in coordination. And so you need to sort out what those roles and responsibilities are. CRO would be preparing financial models and cash flows. The last show we did with Olga, who did a great job, she talked about 13-week cash flows, and she talked about rolling financial models. So the CRO would be responsible for those. And you can go to the Sinclair Range website at sinclairrange.com, and you'll actually see there's templates on the posting related to that Martinis with Scott show, and you can see what those models are. And together, you help existing management with existing operational decisions and make sure they're in line with the turnaround plan. and anything else that you may need to deal with as a CRO that comes up from time to time. And of course, if you have a formal insolvency, if you have a chapter 11 or chapter whatever in the US, and if you have a CCAA or a notice of intent to file a proposal under the BIA in Canada, the turnaround professional, the interim executive, the CRO would hopefully walk the company through the day-to-days of that process, because it's a lot of work. You need a lot of understanding. There's a lot of strategy, discussion, right? And so you as a business owner, as a manager, this is not your day-to-day. It is the CRO's day-to-day with the help of legal counsel. And so that would be another part of that mandate. Okay, so why do you need a CRO? That's what a CRO is. Hopefully we all understand that. Why do you need one? Well, this comes back to we've been doing a 10-part series with Olga on how to finance a troubled company, which mirrors to some extent off the Sinclair Range protocol for turning around a troubled company, which I don't think we've covered in depth, but we will at some point go through that. But the bottom line is, you're in trouble. You're in financial trouble. Both maybe from you've run out of money, so you have a balance sheet issue, and you need to restructure. You've run out of valuation for all the stakeholders that you might have, but also on an operational basis, or maybe instead on an operational basis. In other words, you're just losing money. You still have money you can lose, but you're losing money, and you need to stop that. And so you've admitted to yourself that you're in trouble, and you need to make change, right? Because what you're doing isn't working. It's the definition of insanity, and so you want to make change. So for you, for the business owner, you're getting help to turn around the business, and also you're building credibility with stakeholders. You're going to your bank, you're going to your lenders, you're going to your employees, you're saying, we need help. We need to get from here to there through this transition, and for that short period of time, whether that be 3 months or a year or whatever it is, we've hired this interim executive, this CRO, to get us from here to there. And that is an admission that builds credibility with these stakeholders, which often they need to see, right? So think about your own employees. They need to see that you're making changes to get things to work. From a stakeholder's perspective, let's think about a bank. They're looking for an external professional who will go in and understand the need to stop losing cash today. Not the plan to have a plan, which was the CanTrust show, but to actually do it now, stop losing money. Someone who is capable of effecting change, someone who could support a restructuring process should there be a formal insolvency restructuring process, someone who is geared towards getting through the bank's looking for an independent party because they're most likely to be honest and truthful about the financial health of the company. This is a really important point. So if you're a banker, if you take yourself out of your business ownership position for a minute and consider yourself a banker, and you put that hat on, well, what do you need to do? Your very first fundamental decision is, do I want to support this company, right? Do I trust them? Do I want to support them, or do I want to liquidate them? And if you want to support them, then you get into, are they capable, and do I trust them? And if you bring in an independent third party to help with that discussion, it brings a ton of credibility, and the bank believes that they're not being lied to, or because that turnaround professional, if they were to lie to the bank, well, they would never work again. So there's a lot more, certainly in that industry. So there's a lot more credibility than there is with the direct borrower who has personal guarantees and all those sorts of pressures to try and spin a tale of positivity that maybe doesn't exist. So from the bank's perspective, that would be a reason to have a CRO. Okay, when? We've covered what they are, why you would want one. When would you get one? I get this question all the time. Obviously, the answer is as early as possible. Do you want to be forced into having a CRO or an interim executive by the bank? Or do you want to proactively go to them and say, hey, we made some changes and we brought in this specialist to help us get through this trouble, and so work with us, right? That's a great message instead of having this forced upon you. Here's something that we deal with all the time in terms of timing is the company says to itself, well, and it says to me or it says to another CRO, hey, we need a CRO. We need someone to help us turn this around. Well, we have these 8 things that we want to get through first because maybe they're going to save the company, right? Someone's going to buy us, and we had someone else come to us and they said they want to buy us. Someone over here said we need some finance, that could provide some bridge financing. And so there's always 100% of the time there's a reason to wait until you flush out the next deal. And my question to you is why? What value is there in waiting rather than bringing in a professional whose job it is to do these sorts of transactions, to run a process to protect you and to protect the value of the shareholder? What is the mindset where you say to yourself, I'm just going to exhaust every single possibility I can think of, and when I fail on every single possibility I can think of, then I'm going to go to the CRO and say, okay, over to you, work your magic, right? I can tell you that doesn't work very well. As soon as you possibly can, bring in the advisor. You don't need to commit full time right away, right? You can bring in a CRO as a advisor to the board on a limited engagement. You could bring them in on a limited engagement for a limited amount of money as an advisor to the CEO in the short term. You don't need to go from zero to handing over the reins to a CRO, right? If you're doing it early, you could just move into this slowly and start getting professional advice and get yourself into a position. But to wait for a bunch of possibilities doesn't make any sense. If you think about it, you've already been working through a bunch of possibilities for the last year as well. None of them closed either. So what's going to change now? You need to ask yourself that question. Who is a CRO? In selecting your CRO, what are you looking for? And there's, depends on your market, depends on your industry. There's a bunch of different things that you might be looking for. I mean, the typical answer here would be to look at the tool set of what a CRO needs. They need integrity, they need vision, they need persuasion, they need to be able to negotiate, they need to be able to make rapid decisions. Like right now, you can't track things, you can't do a bunch of testing. You need to make a decision right now because the only wrong decision is no decision. They need to be nimble. They need to use A/B testing. And the idea here is everybody thinks that a CRO or someone who's successful in these sorts of high pressure situations, is experienced and always has the right answer. Well, that's not true at all. They come up with a hypothesis and they go with it. And then tomorrow, if it's not working, they change, they test it, they A/B test. That didn't work, let's try this. That didn't work, let's try this. Oh, look, this is getting us a bit further down the path, right? That's the trick to this. It's not to be the smartest guy in the room. It's to be the most aggressive, quickest, and relatively bright, and not to have an ego to think sufficient that's going to hamper you from changing. CROs to have financial acumen and they have to have legal acumen. So that's a pretty unique skill set. And I would throw into this for the Canadian market. CROs should not be an advisor, right? They need to get in, they need to act as principal, they need to make decisions. As I always say in our marketing materials when I'm talking to prospective clients, sitting in a tower in Bay Street or Wall Street or in Midtown, sitting in a tower and cranking out a spreadsheet isn't going to help. That's not what needs to be done. What needs to be done is to get in and help this management team perform. So let's talk about the different types of CROs. And this is entirely my thinking. I haven't found this in any materials anywhere, but this is my experience because there's continuums of turnarounds, right? So you get to do like really insolvent bankruptcy type turnarounds to, we're making money, but we're not making enough money kind of turnaround, an operational efficiency issue, right? And everywhere in between. And it takes a different CRO, a different turnaround advisor to perform in those situations. So different types of CROs. The turnaround CRO, this is somebody who has vision, who is looking to change culture, who's looking to have a company start making money, and is a true turnaround person as opposed to a restructuring professional. And that is distinguished from the other sort of 4 types that we're going to talk about in a second here. We have what I call the number 2 being the exit CRO, which is the same as the turnaround CRO, except the goal is to sell this company really quickly. So it's everything is the same, but in hyperspeed. You're looking to sell this business in 2, 3, 4 months, and it's rather than making substantial long-term improvements, you're keeping your fingers in the dike. That would be an exit CRO. The restructuring CRO, companies in an insolvency process, and the primary goal of the CRO is to walk the company through that process and understand the insolvency side of this, whereas of course the existing management team does not. Fourth would be the our guy inside CRO. So this is when the bank pushes a CRO upon you. They say that they will support the company if in fact you bring in a CRO, when really what they're looking for is not positive change. They're looking to have a spy. They're looking to have our guy inside the company, and they create a divide between the goals of management and the goals of the external stakeholder, in this case being the bank. And fifth would be the consultant CRO. And in a Canadian context, a little bit less in the US, but still the same. Think about an accounting firm, a law firm, someone who's not willing to take any risk or move into this thing, and they're there to consult you and tell you what to do, which in my experience is never really helpful because you're not affecting change. If management, my experience in troubled companies is I've never once walked into a company where everybody already didn't know what was wrong. It's never a mystery. Everybody knows what's wrong. They're not making the changes. They're not making the changes because they don't believe it can be done, because they don't know how to make the change, because they're ineffective at corporate change, because they have their own baggage and emotional ties to the decisions of the past. Whatever it is, they're not making the change. But it's never a secret what the change has to be. Everybody already knows this. This is not brain surgery. So being a consultant, telling them what they already know, how is that going to make any difference to the welfare of this company? It's really not. Here's what not to look for when you're looking for a CRO. I think there's way too much focus on, in Canada for sure, on the restructuring CRO, on the bank saying, yeah, we want our guy inside, and that's really important to me. I think there's an focus on industry experience. This CRO is rarely about understanding the industry better than a management team. It's about changing culture, affecting change, negotiating with stakeholders. It has nothing to do with the industry. People that are looking for an industry-specific CRO are doing so because they don't really understand the issues associated with that specific troubled company, and it's a fallback position. That's my experience with it. Don't avoid distinguishing your CRO based on the company itself. Large company, small company, mid-sized company, public versus private. All of those things impact who your CRO should be. Look for you hire a Sinclair range. I should have told you at the beginning, by the way. You don't even need to listen to this show. You could, the answer is to hire us, but to hire me. But when you do so, you get a firm. You get Olga. You get the analyst support. You get the database support. We have senior advisors with specific different experiences that we can draw upon. You get the role of a firm to support you as opposed to one individual. And if you look at all the different things that a CRO has to do, which we discussed in this show already, you can see that it'd be pretty hard to find one person that can do all of that. And don't fail to understand when you're choosing your CRO the divide that exists between management and a professional such as an accountant or a lawyer. They're just not the same beast. The accountant and lawyer is going to tell you that they can do this job, they can advise you, you can do the turnaround. They don't understand what you're going through. They just flat out don't understand the pressures and the stress and the responsibility that you have to feed all those mouths. That's a big deal that they don't have to deal with. They don't understand it. So when you're looking at a CRO, consider all of those things before you make your selection. How do you hire a CRO? It's an engagement letter. I walked you through some of the bullet points of mine. CRO should be working for the debtor. They should be working for you, the business owner. They should not be working for the bank. They should have their responsibilities to you, to the debtor. They work for the company. That's really important. Don't agree to anything else ever. So in closing, that is what a CRO is. We got a really short show today, 25 minutes. Look at that. I like it. That's what a CRO is. Don't get hung up on the definition. Understand why you need a CRO, turnaround professional, interim executive. Find the right one. Be proactive about it. Get them in sooner rather than later. And the odds of you getting through your turnaround, your transition, go up dramatically. That's it. Thank you for joining me on Martinis with Scott. You want to reach us, reach out to Ashley at sinclairrange.com. You can find us on the website there, or you can provide a comment on the YouTube channel. We'll follow that. Please remember to subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Hope you had a great week. Bye for now.